you think that the nature of Chinese traditions in Singapore has changed over the years?
Of course, Singapore become a very westernized country, and we all the the youngster, a lot of them they are free thinker. They don't believe in all these, especially you talk about 中元节, or you talk about 中秋节, or you talk about 端午节, you talk about 清明节. All these they sort of already lost touch with the value. So this is something I'm very worried about. So to make sure that the children know what the history is, and they will continue to practice, and they will continue to keep the Chinese traditional alive.
But why do you think that so many people have lost touch with the Chinese traditions? Do you think like the media play a role, or the government, or Singaporeans in general, like as an individual? Like what do you think caused the change?
Okay, globalization do play a big role, because when you talk about all these important 节日, to celebrate all these festival, some of the so-called, in fact, all the 节日 that I mentioned besides Chinese New Year, you talk about 清明节, or you talk about 端午节, or you talk about 中元节, or you talk about 中秋节, they are not even a public holiday. Then a lot of young parents, they are working abroad. So when you are working overseas, so I don't think when you're working overseas, I don't think you can celebrate all these special, you can celebrate all these so-called special day. So when year by year, the value of so-called all these Chinese tradition become thinner and thinner. So I'm worried, year after years, people may just forgotten about what is happening, for 中秋节, or what is happening, for some of the 节日 like even 清明节.
So you feel that Singapore doesn't, like the government or like the media, people in general don't recognize the need for these?
They recognize, but I think they should emphasize more, or even they should have more publicity about all these important, festivals, so that people will remember, and will, the cohesiveness of the family will stay closer together, and also to get them stay together to celebrate the same festival. I think this is very important.
Okay, in light of the changing Chinese traditions, do you think it's important to preserve them in their most original form, or to adapt according to times?
Of course, I would strongly encourage to preserve it, the most original so-called way of celebrating. These we don't modify, or we can't change the value, because whatever that we are doing is for the benefit, not only for the to remember the great old our ancestor, but also for the benefit of the young generation.
But why can't we just keep the value but don't practice the traditions?
You can always say you keep the value, you study from book, if you keep the value and you don't practice it, you will never remember. Practicing at the same time remember the value, that will let you stay alive. So I don't believe in, we still keep the value, we remember 七言, or we remember what is 中元会, but we don't practice it. I tell you this thing, you no need to take I think you take less than 3 generations, the whole thing will just collapse, because you keep the value. You don't practice it, is as good as, after 3 or 4 generations, the value becomes zero, because you do not remember.
So in other words, you feel that like if you don't if you don't practice it in your daily life, it will gradually, like the culture will gradually be eroded.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Not only eroded, but is disappeared. After a while, you never know what is happening.
Okay. So now, like, I will just ask you about Singapore in general. What does it mean to you to be a Chinese Singaporean?
A Chinese Singaporean need to preserve the Chinese tradition. That's what I strongly, because you must understand, Singapore is a multiracial country. So we got our right, to preserve the Chinese tradition. Unlike, Malay, Indian, or other racial, they got their own right to preserve their own tradition. So as a Chinese Singaporean, if we don't keep this alive, we don't preserve this Chinese tradition, then sooner or later, the good old practice will will become more westernized. Then end up we are celebrating, or we are only keeping the Western kind of tradition, then which is not right and very wrong. So I think as a Singaporean, as a Chinese, strongly encourage all Chinese Singaporeans to preserve our good old value and the tradition.
Okay. Does being a Chinese make you identify more as a Singaporean, or like, as in, do you feel a sense of belonging to Singapore being a Chinese?
Of course, because you see, in the world there are only four major. I'm talking about that. In the world there are only four countries that having more of Chinese. The four countries is China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So how can I say being a Chinese, Singapore Chinese? Of course I feel proud and I feel great of being a Chinese. In Singapore. As I say, in the world only for Chinese country. In Singapore, Chinese take up about 70%. I would say 70 to 80% of the whole population that is Singaporean.
Okay.
So I'm very proud of being a Chinese Singaporean. So my duty, of course, is to preserve whatever we have from our ancestors, pass it over to us, and our duty is to pass the good value and also to practice it to our next generation.
Okay. How do you think the media has affected the loss of Chinese traditions?
Yeah, you see Singapore, although it's a Chinese country, but it's also being influenced by Western teaching. You may see all Singaporeans speak English. So somehow or rather the media, they need to do a lot more, to cultivate, these Chinese tradition, in order not to erode, the value of what we are practicing. So personally, I felt that being a Chinese Singaporean, continue to preserve this good practicing and the old, value. We need to get the media and get the paper, to emphasize and also to organize more. This type of activity, to talk more. The paper got to talk more about the value, of all these Chinese tradition. At least to introduce to the majority of the Chinese that why we are celebrating all these tradition.
In what other ways do you think we can preserve Chinese traditions?
More publicity, education, I think is very important. From the start, as early as primary school, we need to teach all the students about all these important Chinese tradition. Then to continue to cultivate these, maybe secondary school and junior college. Then to practice it, even in the uni day. And to instill all these positive, Chinese tradition value into each of all Chinese individuals. So when they grow up, then I'm very sure they already know what they are doing, and they also understand why their parent carry out all these activity, and it's easier for them to pass it down to the next generation.